Netflix keeps showing me three-body problem, but is it really three-body problem or three-body propaganda? The real smoking gun I found is in the author's note. And by the way, I'm basing this on the book, both what I recollect of it and that author's note. First of all, I'll start off with the fact this book was written in 2006. China at that time, or Zhonghua, was and is to a lesser degree now in 2024, which is why they are now on the enemy list because they have changed, was in 2006 wide open to foreign direct investment, telling the public who grew up believing in class struggle and that all people will be brothers and sisters someday in a world of equals, ushering in a glorious system punctuated, as Karl Marx said, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. And there Karl Marx was actually, in my opinion, paraphrasing from the New Testament. Romans, I believe. But then in the 90s and 2006, they were being told these foreign enterprises with the accompanying environmental deregulation and low wages was good for them. So this book then, in that light, that lens, as people like to say now, was not revolutionary at all, but served the status quo, served the emerging wealthy class coming to dominate China, and ironically, coming to dominate, I believe, the Chinese Communist Party, at least in part. Well, here we are now in 2024, and remember, before I told you about a BBC documentary about Karl Marx, where Karl Marx said that all the cultural institutions work to promote the status quo or the dominant interests. Paraphrasing a bit, but that's the gist of it. And here we are now in 2024, as we were then, with a system of privatization, private interests dominating our democracy, our media, and one of those most powerful, dominant industries has been, since the dawn of capitalism, been the fossil fuel industry, and now the petrochemical along with it. And in 2024, it should be obvious to everyone, but doesn't seem to be, that this system has resulted in a biosphere pumped full of greenhouse gases, carcinogens, and endocrine disruptors. A human race unable to meet its basic needs in a direct, straightforward, scientific fashion, as the communists used to say, because we are all trapped in a system of sell buy sell, need it or don't, as our climate is clearly unraveling as a result of this system. So rather than questioning this status quo and looking to alternative models, instead pop culture steps in with a yet another protect status quo big media production by warning you the solutions are worse than the problem. Those wanting change are really the bad guys. Remember, I told you about that in my critique of Stranger Things. So just rush off to your job, spraying lawn pesticides on suburban lawns to kill dandelions, and don't question where this is all leading. Jeer, mock, or fear those suggesting alternatives. Well, the author's note at the end of Three Body Problem was the smoking gun. Page 394, author's notes. I've always felt that extraterrestrial intelligence will be the greatest source of uncertainty for humanity's future. Other great shifts, such as climate change and ecological disasters, have a certain progression, built-in adjustment periods. So I guess it's no big deal, climate change and the polluting of our biosphere. Well, thank you so much, author. But contact between humankind and aliens can occur at any time. Ooh, so that's what we should be focusing on. And you know what, author? Even if that is what we should be focusing on, does addressing the destruction of our habitat seem contradictory to that? And what he said about these cycles, that is not what says at the NASA website. That is not what I've been saying for years. That is not what the actual environmental groups dedicated to these causes have been saying. Rather, our planet is heating, or being heated, as NASA scientist Peter Kalmus said, due to the excessive burning of fossil fuels. Or I would add, it's a process set in motion by that excessive burning, because now there are feedback loops kicking in, author. Atmospheric carbon is at its highest it's been in thousands of years. And this rapid heating and rapid climate change is not a normal cycle. Remember, there are two things that primarily affect Earth's temperature and climate: proximity to the sun and composition of the atmosphere. Well, proximity to the sun is those little variations in Earth's orbit. That's the natural cycles. That really isn't changing that I'm aware of. What is changing is the composition of the atmosphere due to, 40 billion tons of fossil fuels being dumped in the atmosphere annually. And as I read his novel, before having read the author's notes, I recall that it was just peppered with attacks on environmentalists. The first character who invoked the space aliens or was sympathetic with them was a lady scientist in China, initially bitter with the Communist Party, kind of ironic in light of what I'm saying, that anti-communism is also part of the problem, but she was bitter with the Communist Party because of their suppressing the book Silent Spring. Well, Silent Spring was the mother of the modern environmental movement, or that's how many people refer to it, because it took environmentalism from not just being something about protecting wilderness and habitat, but also being about protecting the very living biology of living creatures, including our own, and saying, hey, look at all these pesticides. Is there a better way? There's got to be a better way. She was also bummed out about mass deforestation projects, if I remember correctly. The other character was an American, a white man, I believe, who was living in China and working on reforestation, something like that, who then became dispirited by he could plant all these trees just to see them all cut down again later. Then I remember a line in there about the space aliens seeding the environmental movements, fomenting them so they would slow down our progress, make us nice and weak to an alien invasion because of all these Luddites. Well, as far as space alien plots to destroy us, wouldn't it make more sense that they are working with petrochemical fossil fuel industries and consumer capitalism in general, just to superheat our planet and pump our bodies full of microplastics and those carcinogens and greenhouse gases, or carcinogens and endocrine disruptors, so we are this sickly, climate storm-ridden species scrabbling around the planet fighting in ethnic warfare? Wouldn't that make more sense? Because the environment has never been about stopping progress necessarily. It's been about the nature of that progress. Never was it about jobs versus the environment, which is kind of a similar idea. You're slowing down economic growth. It's what kind of jobs? Are you going to pay people to poison our biosphere and call it a day? Or is there some greater purpose to our existence? And just to touch on the anti-communist aspects, well, you see in the beginning of the drama, if you're watching it or you're reading the book, he's focusing on the Red Guard and how terrible it all becomes. Well, there is some truth in that narrative, as there is truth of the early communist movements in the Soviet Union and China were really enamored with the benefits of capitalism. They were really enamored with the capitalist definition of progress, but just viewed it, and I believe this is kind of how Marx viewed it, that those benefits were not being shared with the people, that many people were being left behind, starving, working long hours in miserable factories, being displaced. So their goal was, during that older time period, I believe, more to introduce what they thought were the benefits of capitalism, but have them for the people. I just wanted to touch on the Red Guard. You might find this really interesting. I had a professor who was from China, and I did a summer study in Hong Kong when it was still British territory. who said he was in the Red Guard, and he said it wasn't really as simple to say the Red Guard was communist. He said it was more of a youth uprising that challenged all status quo, challenged all traditions and norms, or at least a lot of them, and was kind of the young people taking power of the streets. And he remembered a point where he had accidentally knocked over a police officer off his bicycle, low carbon there, and that police officer was, I assume, a member of the Communist Party, knocked him off his bicycle. The police officer got up and apologized. And this Chinese professor used that as an example to say how the Red Guard really was young people taking control of everything, knocking down other Communist Party officials, calling themselves the true communists. And the only person they wouldn't touch was Mao. That Mao kind of harnessed it a bit to, you could argue, to protect himself. But here I want to draw further and say, if you look at the similar time period in the US of A, there was those big hippies movements and counterculture and protests. And what happened in America, well, was the Kent State Massacre, police being called into, or National Guard, to shoot those protesters. So in both countries at the same time, you had this massive youth population rising up and just getting tired of like listening to the elders. So we can't really say that was inherent in communist thinking. But yeah, I have my criticism of communism and socialism, but why am I now saying, hey, don't attack it? Well, here's why. Look, if you strip away all the ideology, that Soviet Union especially was a public sector-based economy. Theoretically, it wouldn't have needed everyone racing around buying, selling, buying. It could more directly address people's needs. So now as we see our planet burning down because we're all trapped in this system of sell, buy, sell, need it or don't, and cancer-ridden, childhood epidemics of cancer due to all these microplastics and petrochemical products circulating around there, it should be more obvious now the system has a problem than it was in the past, just based on inequality and some people being poor and dying homeless as they've been all along. And it should be obvious to everyone who lived through the time period when there was a Soviet Union to when there wasn't in America or any of these capitalist countries, that capitalism behaved much better when there was a communist challenge. Why? Because we are told capitalism thrives on competition. With no competition, it is behaving worse, plain and simple. So just to wrap it up again, if you want to talk, author, about the real space alien plot, if there is one, it is the manipulation of our society through consumer capitalism to get us all insecure, stressed out, our bodies ridden with chemicals to sell disposable plastic products, and a planet burning down because of all the greenhouse gases, because we've been tricked into thinking we need a massive vehicle to go from A to B. All right. Hey, I hope you found this one interesting, good food for thought. If you did, please make sure you have subscribed to my channel. You are clicking that notification bell. You are liking, you are commenting. Thank you to my 2 subscribers at Patreon, Bella Grissi, Environmental Coffee House. And as always, until next time, peace be with you. Keep with that Chinese theme. 再见.